Hi, it's Ted Ritzer, host of the Greening Government webinar speaker series. It's a collaboration between my department, Alberta Environment and Parks, the Alberta Climate Change Office, and the Municipal Climate Change Action Centre. The goals of the series are to help governments in Alberta reduce their carbon footprint through their operations and grow their green economy. And today, the webinars are following a theme of blockchain-powered green economy in Alberta, and that was inspired by, first off, an author, Mark Anilski, did a presentation on growing Alberta's green economy, and in that presentation, he really featured the significance of the ATB Financial within Alberta, and after that presentation, it was stirred my interest in ATB, and recently I noticed a press release on November 15th on ATB's move within Alberta to adopt a decentralized blockchain-based identity system called Sovereign. And when I researched that technology, I was really fascinated by what the government of Finland was doing in support of that. And our speaker today is right in the thick of that and worked on a white paper called MyData, which essentially sort of uses, in part, the sovereign decentralized digital identity to be able to protect citizens' privacy, their personal data, while at the same time grow their green economy within Finland. So we're so fortunate today to be joined by Dr. Antti Poikola, or Yogi. So Yogi, this is just wonderful that you're presenting from Helsinki this morning.
Hi, yes. It's evening here, so good morning for you there. So thanks for having me here in the webinar. Shall I go on?
Absolutely, and just folks, there will be Q&As within the online chat window, but I think Yogi will be providing you an opportunity to pose questions at the strategic points within his presentation.
Sure. It would be nice to get some questions during the presentation and of course afterwards. So here we go. People call me Yogi. Antti is one of the most typical names in Finland, so it's good to have some nicknames. So I'm going to tell you about the MyData movement, how it got started in Finland, and especially the role of the government there, supporting people having access to their own data and being able to decide what to do with it. And also then I tie it back to the question of digital identity and also the sovereign technology, which you will hear in this webinar series later on more. But I'm also member of the board of trustees in the Sovereign Foundation. So this is what's going to follow. And you can access my slides already now during the presentation or afterward in this short URL. bit.ly/MyData webinar. And just to give you a bit of idea about Finland, we are more or less on the same kind of climate area here. And Finland just turned 100 years yesterday, so we had big celebrations, Independence Day in Finland, and we love ice hockey as you do, and we have saunas and 1,000 lakes, and we drink lots of coffee. And we do very good job in digital technologies on the government side, I would say. Of course, there is a lot to do more, but I think this MyData thing is moving quite nicely in Finland because this is such a small country, but in other bigger countries it could be done more on the local level. So Finland has 5 million people, so it's kind of a mid-size town in the global scale. So I am a researcher at Aalto University and more specifically in Helsinki Institute for Information Technology, and I'm also founder of Open Knowledge Finland, and this MyData movement that I'm going to tell you about has its roots here in Finland in open data movement, which might be more familiar to many of you and government people as well as other people. So kind of the idea of in open data, the idea is that if there is some data resources that are produced perhaps with taxpayers' money and there is no sensitive information included, it makes sense to open those data reserves for wider use and license it openly so that everybody can access to that data. But of course, when we speak about personal data, we cannot think that for example, our health data could be put online for everybody to access. But the same fundamental philosophy of making data more usable is the fundament of personal data or MyData movement as well. There we just think that the data should not be open for everybody, but it should be open for people themselves, meaning that I could get access to the data that is collected about me. And yes, here you can see the white paper that was mentioned already. The English version is rather short, it's only 12 pages, but that kind of puts in a nutshell what was the status of the development 2 years ago, 2015. So it's not brand new anymore, and there has been lots of other work done besides it and after it. That white paper was published by the Ministry of Transportation and Communications in Finland, and I'm going to tell you soon more about that. But to get started, so this is the logo of the MyData movement. You can go and see in mydata.org or mydata2018.org, which is the conference. So this just unites many initiatives around the world that aim to the same direction of getting or giving people more power over their personal data. And as you know, we leave the data trails behind us everywhere, every day. So there is, for example, electricity or utilities data. Maybe we use some cards in the public transportation or in education. We have these MOOCs, online courses and platforms that collect data. Then there are all the IoT devices and mobile apps and web services, and if we use loyalty cards in retail, or our banks collect data about our finances and insurance and health data, that's big area. Or then people just like I have this Polar watch, we can measure quantified self-movement, so taking self-measurements. And finally here also the government sector that collects quite good amounts of personal data as well. And that data has huge value. This comes from a study of Boston Consulting Group. So they estimated that the value of personal data and digital identity related services in EU countries by 2020 could be 1 trillion euros. The question is, who gets this value? And in MyData, we think that there should be a value share with people whose data is it about. And nowadays it goes pretty much, the value goes to those who collect the data in the first place. Sorry, you see some of my Slack messages, they're popping out. Hopefully there are not so many. Okay, so the white paper that we published by the ministry, or was published by Ministry of Transportation and Communications, you can find from online. If it's of course in PDF version, but here it's in GitHub, so it's also openly licensed. It's okay to use the images and translate it. Well, it's in English, so it's no need to translate, except maybe for French if you wish. That went quite well in Finland. So after the ministry published that white paper, it went to the highest level in the decision-making documents in Finland, so it's in the government agenda. Only with one small mention, it says that people's right to decide about and monitor their personal information will be enhanced. So, but this is really on the top level of policy making in Finland, and it has led to several government spearhead programs and pilots on making the personal data more accessible for people and usable in different use cases, as well as on private side. This is how it is the situation right now. There are like many services that have some sort of APIs, programming interfaces, and the data more or less can flow from one place to another, but there is no real infrastructure that would make it easy. And we as people here, we are left aside. For example, I have on my password list, I have maybe 200 different web services that I have different accounts and passwords. And from some of those, I have done these sharing of data, that data from one service can flow to another service. But I really don't have a clue where it's going. Plus, then there are many terms of service that allow these service providers to do secondary use of my personal data, and I have no idea what happens. And of course, it's also problematic for programming or developing applications, because if somebody here changes some API, then everything gets broken in the other end. And the MyData idea goes to two directions. First of all, it wants to bring people, we call it human-centric approach to personal data management. So giving the control for the people themselves, so that we really know what's happening with our data. But on the other hand, we imagine that it will facilitate quite much also the data flow and reuse, meaningful reuse of personal data. Like, for example, if there is let's say some startup that develops an application that could make more visible how I use what kind of grocery store shopping I do, so that I could make, for example, more healthier or more economical or environmental friendly choices. Nowadays, they would need to go here to knock on the door of the big retail chains and ask if they could open some access to the loyalty card data. And these big retail chains, they are not so eager to just serve all sorts of new companies or startups. They just focus on their own business. But in the future, we think that the developer of or the startup that develops some useful application for me, they should not need to ask from the grocery store the data. They could ask from me. They could come and say, hello, Yogi, we have here this application that you might be interested. In order this application to work properly, we would need you to give access to your shopping data. And then I could think whether this service is good enough or if I really need it, and grant that access to this data. So that's in the essence of the MyData model. And this would break the currently quite closed data value chains. So nowadays it happens that whoever collects the data also manages it and uses it. And a typical example, there was the mention about banks already. So banks collect, they get data of every transaction that we have where we use our credit card. And what do? They give us maybe once in a month a list of our transactions. Not really super innovative use of that data. There could be extended services that give this kind of financial dashboards that give access to, even if we have accounts in several banks, and help us doing better choices regarding our money. But nowadays it's still very, very hard to develop such services because the data is not flowing. And in open ecosystem, it could be so that data is born in one place. Maybe it's a bank, maybe it's a retail chain, maybe it's a mobile app or something else. And then I could decide what to do with it. Of course, I need some tools for it. So I'm flesh and blood, so I cannot make those data connections through my body, really. But if I had my own MyData service where I can give this access or grant that this data can flow to this service or this organization, etc. So that means that the same data could be used in many places, which is completely different from these closed data value chains, which are still very common. So I'm just reading in and out for a moment. If anybody has questions so far, I would be happy to take some. If not, then I just continue, but hopefully you can just intercept me at any moments, and I'm happy to guide my presentation to direction that helps the best this audience. So don't be shy with the questions and comments. So what I explained earlier is what has happened in Finland, but MyData is by no means Finnish innovation at all. It has been the same idea of human-centric personal data has been discovered in many places at the same time. And after we published the white paper in English, we started to get connections from all over the world, people saying that this is exactly what we have been thinking, and we have this project that is aiming to the same direction, and we have these existing tools and services. And we then started to, after 2015, when the white paper came out, we started to develop this global community. And just end of last summer, in August, we had a big conference, MyData 2017, in Helsinki, Finland, and Tallinn, Estonia at the same time. And there we published this MyData declaration that was bundled together with tens of people from different countries that have been active in the movement, and it reflects the general ideas of the MyData philosophy. So I recommend you to go to this mydata.org/declaration and read the full version there. But I'm going to go through now the big main shifts that we hope that will happen in the personal data future. So, as said, MyData is human-centered approach to personal data management. And the first shift that we want to see is moving from formal rights to actionable rights. Of course, there are different data protection and privacy legislations in different countries, but in many places, mostly, even if people have some rights over their personal data, they are not very functional in pragmatic sense, so that I could get my data. And this is a picture of my data that I got when I executed my legal right to get my personal data from my telecom provider, so my mobile phone operator. So there is a law in Finland and in most of the I think in all European countries, similar law that if you request your personal data from some controller of data, they need to respond in certain time and provide you the data. And I had long discussion over email with my telecom operator that could it be anyhow possible to get it this in digital format, even in PDF? And no. This was what I got, like this thick pile of paper. They sent me over snail mail, and you can see there some coordinates every time when I use my phone, even a data connection or a call from somewhere. It records the closest cell phone tower, and it collects my location history. So this is location history where I have used my phone from, I think it was from three months period. And there is a new right coming in the European regulation, but actually this is something that might be interesting for you to check out also, the so-called GDPR. It's the General Data Protection Regulation. And that's, I would say this is most advanced data protection regulation in the world. And it also affects to countries outside of European Union if the organizations or companies offer some services for the citizens of the European Union. But even if you would not offer anything for the Europeans, I think this regulation has some ideas that are worth considering quite seriously also over there in Alberta. So it has this Article 20 called Right to Data Portability. And it says that the data subject, meaning me, I have rights to receive the personal data concerning me, what I have provided to the company or organization in a structured, commonly used and machine-readable format. So basically, this is what I highlighted here, says that this is not anymore legal soon. And the soon is on May 25th, 2018. That's when the transition period of 2 years ends. So this regulation is in force already, but there is transition period going on until the May 25th. And there is some citizen movements that maybe on May 26th, some organization will receive requests of personal data from citizens of Europe. And then second shift in the MyData declaration is that we want to move from data protection to empowering people with their own data. So what I mean with this is that nowadays the data protection regulation comes from the idea that there are small and weak individual people that needs protection against strong corporations and organizations that might misbehave using people's personal data on manners that are not adequate. But we want to say that beside protection is super important, but it's not enough. We also want to get access to our own data so that we can decide what to do with it, so to reuse it for our benefits. Like I said, those examples of maybe reusing my loyalty card data for having more visibility on my buying habits or things like that. And we see it so that these data giants, there are some logos, no offense to anybody. I'm just saying always that the current big companies, they are maybe not so bad after all, but the rules of the game of the current data economy are not really supportive for data protection and privacy. And we need to change the rules, and the big companies will follow also. But on current data economy, there are some organizations that create really smooth platforms for data to flow and being integrated and used. So the usage of data is really good, but the privacy and data protection is not so good here in this corner. And then what I mentioned earlier about this new regulations like the EU General Data Protection Regulation, they focus on privacy and protection, and they are advancing it very much. There is a strong data protection in Europe, and I'm fully in favor of that. But too often I hear this complaint that data protection is kind of in clash with the usage of data, so that there could not be that these tight regulations are killing the European industry, and we are losing here in Europe the game because we put too tight regulation. I don't believe in that. I believe that there is a way to get the best of the both worlds, so that we can actually make really good use of data while still having strong data protection. And that's where the MyData aims for. And there the use of data comes through creating the mechanism that people can easily decide themselves who can use their data and for what purposes. And the third movement or shift in the declaration is that we want to move from closed to open ecosystems. And this basically means that currently in the data economy, only those big players that have the machinery of collecting lots of personal data, they are in very much in the best position of actually using it. And newcomers, smaller companies, startups, they don't have this possibility. Even if they would have super cool services to offer for me as an individual, they hardly get over the critical mass of users, because there is no way that I could easily share the data that is already existing elsewhere. So that would open the economical, in economical sense, the data economy for wider variety of companies if people could choose who to share their data with. Again, any questions by this time? If not, then I move on. So who's doing what in this area? So I'm from university in Finland, the government, several ministries and other, including cities. City of Helsinki, for example, have made a promise of moving towards MyData in digital development. And then there are lots of companies that are looking to this direction. So here are some logos of such companies or organizations that are strong in the network of MyData, which are actually focusing on building platforms and tools for this. I'm not going to go through these who does what, but just to say that these are just some players on the fastly growing field. This is by no means any full picture of the players. But what's interesting is that these are spread all over the world. So there are some places, like in UK, there are quite many. In Finland, there are a couple, and all over the places. And the struggle is that this is kind of nascent or new movement, and everybody's looking for good use cases. But building just one-off use case is often not so interesting, because the benefits comes really from the network effects, when there are like, if I can give access to many different data sources, and if there are many different services that I can use with my data, that's when the utility really grows up. And that's what we are trying to build in Finland, to actually get locally kind of a cohesive ecosystem of personal data sharing, that we would have many use cases, many companies, and also government agencies involved locally in same place, so that we can show the network effects. Here are the MyData hubs. So the MyData organization that I quickly told the history, that after the white paper we started to get connections from all over the world. So that community is now growing and is on its way to get established as individual entity, maybe NGO. But you can also, this would be actually really good to see if there could be some local activity, for example, in Alberta. And how it started in Finland was that after the white paper, the Ministry of Transportation and Communications and us from the university, we started to facilitate this so-called MyData Alliance. We have the biggest companies like the telecom operators, some banks, retail chains, and then a long list of smaller companies and startups involved in this alliance, working together towards these MyData principles. And the key is really that MyData ideas should be done so that the data can flow across the borders of the organizations whenever I, as an individual, give permission to use my data. And that's why we need to gather people together. And this alliance has been working in Finland now for 2 years, and now it's really started to kick in, and we have bigger funded projects starting and new pilots coming up. But it took quite some time to get people together and learn about what are the potentials, and then people kind of internally selling it in their organizations. But this is also now happening in Estonia, and in France there is big hub. Most of the others, they are quite new and just starting. If you're interested, I strongly warmly welcome you to join the MyData Global Network Slack channel. You can click here on the slides or just go to mydata.org and you find there the same connection button. And in the Slack, we can then there are like all the people from these different hubs, and we share our experiences and things, what works here and what works there, and what could be done locally to get this movement towards human-centered personal data. And of course, this is the yearly thing when people come together, and in the end of August next year, we have the third edition of MyData Conference. This time it's only in Helsinki, 3 days, and just go and see the mydata2018.org and join to the newsletter there. And I'm going to use my last minutes of the presentation to just capture this MyData thing with the what's the role of digital identity here?
Yogi, I just interrupt. There's been a question. What is the implication of blockchain, Ethereum, and personal data? Will it be safer? Should individuals get involved with supporting the network with miners?
Yes, I'm going now to the blockchain part.
Okay.
So this was a bit of lengthy introduction, but I'm thinking that it all makes sense when I go through now, because this of course, when we have started to develop these MyData ideas, what I explained earlier, so it's kind of combination of the legal things, what is the regulation and policies. Then there is big part of the technology, how to make it actually happen. And then there are the business motives, and everything need to kind of click together. And the technical part is really the blockchain revolution has really impacted on the data sharing, given the vision that it can be done decentralized, because this is how it's explained in the MyData white paper, that individual is the principal of his or her own data, needs to give the permission from data source that, okay, the data could flow from here, from A to B, and the B is the service that uses the data. And we need some sort of tools for that, and that's what we call MyData operator. It could be the custodian of the data. Maybe I could actually store the data locally into my own data wallet, but in this picture, which I think is a pretty common use case, is that the data is not centrally stored anywhere, but I just give the permission. And this yellow arrow is the consent or permission, that I give consent to this data source that, okay, you can get access to the or give access to the data for this startup that gives me a good service, and then I give another consent for the startup. Yes, it's okay for you to use that data for creating this dashboard, for example. And who are these MyData operators? We don't want them to be one, because that would be terrible future if we have one global MyData operator that connects everything. So that's not the future we envision. And we think that like we have banks, there are many banks in the world, and if I go to the local cafeteria and pay with my bank card there, it just works. They don't ask if I'm client of the same bank that they are. Or we can compare it to the mobile phone operators. If I get even Canadian phone number, I can just make the call and like magic it connects. And somehow there are two phone operators on the way, and the connection gets created, and even the operators get their fair share of the connection. And this is what we envision in MyData happening also, that maybe I'm connected to one MyData operator, and the data source is connected to completely another operator, and the one who uses the data can be connected to third operator. And that's what creates the network effects. We don't expect everybody to connect to the same point, and this needs, I want to be able to change also the operator, that if the prices goes up, or they have bad press or not so good service, I can change from one MyData operator to another one. And here, what is this dashed line bit that connects the operators? That's the part of the blockchain. That's the identity. So blockchain technologies, I'm sure that you have heard about those. Basically, the idea is that they create some sort of central way of or database that can be accessed from many points, but it's not controlled by any single operator. And what we need the blockchain for is direct kind of the addressing purposes, that if I'm here, I'm Yogi in MyData world, how can these data sources and the data using services find my data and me? So I need to have a digital identity, as well as the data sources and the user services. They have digital identities, and these digital identities should be not governed by any single super operator in the world, but kind of self-sovereign. And that's what I mean by self-sovereign identity in terms with MyData. And here is an example that is actually getting some traction already in Finland and in Sweden. It's about recruitment services and job markets. So let me think that I'm authorizing, there is a development of national registry for facilitating the job market matching, so that the unemployed people and vacant jobs could be matched more efficiently. And currently the field is dominated with a couple of big recruitment companies that boast of having databases of hundreds of thousands of CVs. But as you know, the CVs, they get old very fast, and in people who are looking for jobs, they need to fill in their profile in different places, and it's not very efficient way. But also the government is not going to take over the business from these recruitment companies, but they are creating this platform where I could share easily my current CV data, and even in verified format, for example, that I have made a university degree. And this should happen so that I might be connected to one MyData operator and the National Registry of Education Degrees that can offer the verified data of my university degrees is connected to another MyData operator, and the recruitment service portal is connected to third operator. And this blockchain, now we are looking quite much on the sovereign, but similar technologies are others. I believe very much on the sovereign, but future will show what really is the winner here. But anyway, some sort of self-sovereign identity blockchain is needed that these identity transactions can happen. And that's kind of where I want to leave this discussion now, so that we could go more to the questions.
Excellent. So folks, if you want to pose any questions, please submit them through the online Q&A window. While you're thinking of questions, Yogi, what I would throw out there, it seems to me it's kind of a sort of two contrasting models. Centralized proprietary silos, which could be represented by the companies like Apple, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Twitter, versus what you have proposed as open, decentralized digital identities. Does that capture some of the fundamental differences? Yes,
you are very much on the. I would even maybe this centralized, decentralized question is one way to see it, but also interoperability. I think that's the word that we are looking here. So I have nothing against if bigger players, if they have good services and ecosystems that are serving well their customers and people, as far as they are interoperable with others, because that's what's not happening now. If you are in one ecosystem, let's say Google, and you want to switch over to another one like Apple, it's not really so smooth, and these companies are not striving for interoperability. They are making interoperability in some cases when that's the business, if it's business-wise good for them. But I think this interoperability should be the base, because then it makes the companies to start the competition from different level. So really not locking with the data. That's kind of not locking customers or people with their data to one service, but to compete with those real values, not the locking. So I would say that it's about interoperability.
So we've got a question related. Oh, I see. Brian was wondering about intra versus inter on some of your slides. So he was just wondering about what was posted there.
Which slide, for example?
Brian, do you want? Oh, okay. He doesn't understand the word that you had used.
In which slide?
Brian, if you want to submit the word.
I'm happy to explain everything. I'm sorry also if I use some jargon or maybe not so clear terminology. So I don't know how what kind of audience I have, and maybe pronunciation is not perfect also.
Well, I think it was interoperability.
Okay, that was not so much on my slides. I think I did not write the word in the slides, but interoperability means that, for example, let me take an example. If you see this network here, and if you imagine that, to take the example from existing world, so the phone network or the mobile phones. So nowadays, when I make a call, mobile phone call to a friend of mine, I might be connected to this Finnish mobile operator, and my friend could be connected to another mobile operator, for example, in Sweden. And these mobile operators, they have their own systems of making it interoperable, so that my phone call can be actually connected through two different operators all the way to the end. And it would not be possible if they are not technically connected, if they are not technically interoperable, but also if they would be using completely different business models. If there could be like one telecom operator says that the one who calls will pay, and the other one says that it's all free, but you have to listen 30 seconds of advertisements before we can connect the phone call. If there would be completely different business models between these operators, then it could not be interoperable. So interoperability means that multiple competing organizations can make something to happen technically and business-wise so that it works as a system.
But it's really interesting, the point that you made related to sort of the big five or whatever, Yogi, is, you know, I mean, technically you had the base of the open TCP IP on the internet. And then the reality of what happened was a number of major companies sort of took control of individuals just through the sheer mass of, you know, Apple users, Amazon users, Google users, Facebook, and had these centralized sort of digital silos that even though they were all using open internet standards, the users didn't have control of their data.
Yes, I just recently read very good blog post that said that currently the protocols that are open, those are quite thin. And on top of those thin protocols, there are very fat services. So these data silos, they have grown on functionality. They have much more there than what's on the open and shared and interoperable protocol layer. And blockchain technologies kind of aim to have a lot more shared functionality on the protocol layer, which is shared and interoperable and connected, and so that the protocols could be actually quite fat, and the services on top of those protocols would be, in compared to the current situation, more thinner. So kind of balancing it out. There is always something that is built on top of the protocol layer. So we cannot have everything on the whole stack to be fully interoperable, but the question is that how much there is this shared layer and how much is proprietary and closed. Well, so I would like to raise the bar a little bit also, that we would have a more on the protocol layer and then a little bit thinner services.
Well, while we wait for more questions, I guess what I would pose is, you know, I mean, if you have, for example, if you want to grow a green economy using blockchain, for example, and you have an existing situation where of each new advertising dollar right now that's generated through using sort of these kind of internet-based technologies, 99 cents of that new digital advertising dollar goes to Facebook and Google. So no wonder we have newspapers failing globally. So when you look at this, how you are going to grow a green economy, what you're proposing is absolutely in the middle and strategic to the whole point.
Yes, I think that the ad-based economy as really the dominant model for internet businesses, that's what we have now, but the whole web age is not so far old, maybe starting from the 90s, and now we have experimented a little bit but we are still in the very young phase of internet, and in the future I think we will get much more variety on the business models than the ad-based only. So it cannot continue in this manner for very, very long, because it's already so visible in many senses that people are not so confident on this, and there is more trust is decreasing, and the trend is that if there comes and when there come models that are more fair, so to say, people are ready to adopt those, but it has not happened yet. It may happen in some years, or it may take 10 years, but eventually I would say that there must be some changes, because this model is not sustainable way. Well, as the news industry is having troubles, so will have the currently strong ad-based internet business models. They will have their troubles in the future.
Well, and it seems like the EU through the the General Data Protection Regulation, it seems like you guys have been much more proactive and thoughtful about this issue.
Yeah, that's a funny history. It was definitely the most lobbyist piece of regulation in the history of European Union, and it came from the acknowledgement that the earlier regulation that was from the year 95, it was outdated. When that was created, there was no idea what was the internet future. And the European Commission proposed this new regulation back in 2012 as quite strict data protection environment, and it was already watered down pretty much by the lobbyists in the Brussels. So the big companies were lobbying heavily against of any stronger human rights in the digital world. But then came the Snowden revelations, and that kind of turned the heads of the politicians, that they were not anymore listening the lobbyists so much, and it actually came out quite strict. I would say it is very strict piece of regulation. Of course, it doesn't. It's not enough in itself, and the strict regulation needs also good tools. So what I hope is that out of the strict regulation comes a very solid base of new digital management tools for the personal data, so that it's not only hindering the development, but also giving new, more robust infrastructure for personal data sharing. And that remains to be seen what really happens.
Well, and I think when I did research that ended up, we had Sri Alaprolu, who's the IoT manager for Amazon, when he presented. The reason I approached him, Yogi, was in my research, I found that the transit authorities of London, Singapore, and actually Chicago had all looked at the sharing of public transit data via Amazon in a way that empowered local programmers. And I think what you're proposing here through the MyData model actually empowers local, almost like a local API economy based on a different way of viewing personal data.
Yes, I think so. Of course, it's quite different of having, especially from the researchers, they would, or many app developers as well, they would like to get this holy grail of access to the data, let's say location data or mobility data of millions of people, all the citizens of this town or city. And in MyData model, you basically get permissioned access to data of one person. If I give the permission, I give it on my behalf, but it doesn't mean that the app developer or researcher would get access then at the same time to anybody else's data. They would need to request that separately. So the use cases are quite different. I would say that if you are familiar with big data analysis, that's one side of the coin, and then on the other side of the coin there is MyData. MyData is rather small data. It's part of the big data sets, but it's small and permissioned, which is different than big and anonymous. And both have different use cases, and quite often they actually feed into each other. So maybe, for example, if we speak about electricity data, I may have my very specific electricity consumption levels, but it tells me nothing if I don't know where to compare it. So there would need to be some sort of aggregated or general big data approach that I could see that, okay, I'm using more energy than people that live in the similar kind of houses. Maybe I should do some changes and in my habits. So only after I compare it to the population level data, then I get some of the insights.
So I guess what I would propose as kind of a closing is, what kind of words of wisdom, Yogi, would you have for governments in Alberta in considering this MyData model within the context of governments in Alberta?
Well, I think it's really, this is something that nobody can do alone. So we are speaking about ecosystem development. So we need players from government as well as from the private sector, and what to do exactly, how to get it started, how to get the first pilots where you give, for example, if you are in one government agency, you have your population of customers or citizens that you serve, and you want to give them some access to their own data. So what do they do with that data? There needs to be the services that use it. And I really think that the model what we had in Finland seemed to work quite well. So we just rather informally gathered this alliance. So as a first kind of meetups where we invited those government people and private sector people and some researchers together to learn about this idea of putting individuals into the center of their data sharing. And that idea is quite easy to get on the first hand, but then really the devil is in the details, so how to put it into action really, and there are lots of things to learn. And as an advice, I would really go and join to the MyData.org Slack channel and ask that, hello, we would like to do something, and hear some examples of other people, other government agencies, for example, in Estonia and Finland, what they are doing, and then just gather a group of people together in Alberta and have the first discussion on kicking off some pilots. So that's how I would do it.
Oh, that's wonderful, Yogi. And of course, just like we're doing today with this webinar, we're only one click away from being able to collaborate internationally. So the world is starting to become a smaller place, and collaboration is quite easy.
Yes, and of course, I mean, governments are different in Finland. As I said in the beginning, it's a small country, and some of the things might be more practical in smaller countries, but that's why maybe Alberta, more like on the regional level, or even on the even smaller scale, could be the starter, and not to think on nationally from the day one. And in Finland, we aim to think not nationally, but starting locally and then going to the European level. So
absolutely.
From the small.
Well, this has been so wonderful. Thanks so much for agreeing to present.
Yeah, thanks for you, and happy to share, or if you have any questions, you can reach me via Twitter or in the Slack or any channels, and happy to follow up the discussions.
Excellent. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Take care now.
Bye.
Bye.